But some news with this division: the Washington Commanders have signed Von Miller. 36-year-old Von Miller coming over from Buffalo. He was a free agent. He announced it himself. We now have, the Washington Commanders that have 35-year-old Bobby Wagner, 36-year-old Von Miller, 30-year-old Laremy Tunsil, and 34-year-old Zach Ertz. They recently got together and took a team photo to show how excited they were for the upcoming season here. Look at that, Washington Commanders. Just a beautiful team photo to show. They are now a glorified retirement home, and it worked out for them last year. But I think we'll talk about it. But I don't know if the odds are going to be quite in their favor this season. But hey, that's the first team we're talking about. So let's go ahead and get right into those Washington Commandos there. Maybe Redskins, maybe not. We'll see if that ever comes back. Whatever. We'll see how long this name sticks.
Say that.
Is that not? Oh, is that not allowed? I apologize. Look, I can't wait for them to change their name again. They should just have a rotating 3 years, like in the military.
Every 2-3 years.
Every 3 years. So just keep it on PCS season. Every 3 or so years. Just bring in a new name and see what happens. All right. So let's get into this free agency breakdown. I'll go through the names. Derek's going to give us his take, and we'll get through this Washington Commanders team coming off one of their best years in a long, long time, 12-5 record. All right, so losses. Lost a couple of backup wide receivers, guys who saw time in De'Ami Brown and eliminated Zacchaeus. Lost their starting tackle, Cornelius Lucas. Dante Fowler is now to a division rival going to the Cowboys. Jonathan Allen, longtime stalwart of their defense, now on the Vikings. Cornerback Benjamin St. Juste, who was pretty awful anyway. And then safety Jeremy Chin, who did see time for them, is now in Las Vegas. As well as the kickers, Zane Gonzalez. They lost both their kickers, actually. But who cares about kickers? And then bringing them in. Went and, double. They took some, they gave some, and they took some from those division rival Cowgirls there. And Michael Gallup, who we'll talk about him, but did not play football last year. Debo Samuel coming over from San Francisco. Laremy Tunsil, another big free agent addition, come over for Houston. Von Miller, just talked about him. Javon Kinlaw is a decent player who's had some injury history. Jonathan Jones, Will Harris, and then their draft picks, rookie Josh Connerly, looking to immediately make an impact at the right tackle position for them. And then cornerback Trey Amos there. Another guy who they're going to need to step up pretty quickly there. So, a decent amount of change here. They brought in a couple big names, nothing too crazy to the core of this team. Obviously, Jonathan Allen going out and a couple of those names brought in. What is your takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, and I would also add Marshon Lattimore to that list, who they acquired late in the season last year.
That's fair, absolutely fair.
Came in with a hamstring injury, didn't end up playing as much as they would have wanted him to until into the playoffs. And we all kind of remember what happened in their last game against the Eagles and got absolutely blown out of the water. But from a losses addition standpoint, I think they brought in some big time names in Debo and Laremy Tunsil and Von Miller and all of these guys, but I don't know, if it'll necessarily equate to wins. It'll be interesting to see how this team looks, in Jayden Daniels' sophomore year. Not too long ago, we were thinking that CJ Stroud was a top 5 quarterback, just like we do with Jayden Daniels. And now he's being seen as a borderline top 15 quarterback. So Will Jayden Daniels be able to continue to make strides into his sophomore year, or will he take a little bit of a step back as well? But from a defensive side of things, definitely much improved over the last few years. Last year they had a pretty good squad, and they made a couple of additions on that side of the ball. But we'll see. They did lose Jonathan Allen, who was kind of their mainstay along that defensive line. I don't know if they necessarily replaced him with guys like Eddie Goldman and Javon Kinlaw. Kinlaw can be a good guy, but will he be on the field just health wise?
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a good point here. The sophomore slump can absolutely be real. Look, Jayden Daniels is a force. He is somebody who, I don't want in my division because he's a good quarterback. But yeah, we said the same thing about CJ Stroud, and look what happened last year. Teams kind of figure it out a little bit, and especially Cliff Kingsbury and offenses, they tend to get figured out. They had a little bit of some rain all the way through last year, but historically, really the second half of the season they kind of get figured out, and now you kind of catch on to the gimmick a little bit. So it's going to be interesting to see how that is going to go. I think I saw something online, the interwebs, which are much funnier than I am, but they've said, imagine this team in 2020. This would be a squad. So, but it is the year of 2015 or 2025 going into 2026.
Yeah.
So we'll see. The age is a thing, and can they stay healthy? Let's talk about some of these injuries here because I think it gets into some of the questions I have for this team. Sure. Offensive lineman Sam Cosmi tore his his ACL in the playoff games. January 18th, late, and I believe that was the Detroit Lions game.
Yeah.
So this is an injury ACL. Excuse me. That takes 10 to 12 months around to recovery. He's only got 7.5 months. I didn't want to hear your take, but I think there's a decent chance we don't see Sam Cosmi play football at all this
year. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, just as far as Sam Cosmi goes, he's one of the best guards in the league, but what will his timeline look like? Because, injury timeline wise, it's not looking good for Sam Cosmi. Will he come on, the last handful of games, maybe into a playoff push if they make it? Potentially. But I think that's a big if still. Just, I think it's just one of those things. Even at that 7.5 months at week 1, if we stretch that, into December, we're still barely at that 9-month mark.
Right.
And, that's like the earliest that we feel comfortable sending people back. And that's typically people that are not necessarily at that, activity level, high impact level that an offensive guard would have.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, like you said, Sam Cosmi is a really good player. Offensive linemen do typically tend to handle this injury a little bit better, but still, if you're going to risk sending him out there in the back half of the year, you are sending him out there with an increased re-injury risk, whether it's to that ACL, the opposite ACL to a different body part. We see it all the time. So, a bit of a major risk, maybe major reward with Sam Cosmi if we're talking about getting him back near the back half of the year, maybe on the way to a playoff run. So we'll see. I would say, before December or January, I would not expect him to be on the field at all. We'll see if they want to push the envelope depending on where they're at with playoffs and things like that. But they're going to have to fill that hole for the majority of the season to at least get them to the playoffs. And, that's either going to be Herbig or Andrew Wiley trying to step up in that position there. Some other guys, the wide receivers we'll talk about quickly. Noah Brown was doing pretty well for them, and then he kind of had a scary injury last year where his we had a rib injury, but it was actually a kidney laceration. So internal bleeding, internal organ damage, not something you want, especially on the football field. So this is a scary injury that requires medical clearance. We're kind of waiting for an update here, but it's kind of one of those that they kind of got to really be cautious, and we'll kind of see where he's at. Hopefully, with 9 or so months or 10 months, he should be okay. But where are you at with Noah Brown?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, to me, they brought him in. So, it's healing timeline wise, typically this is like a several month thing.
Right.
Sometimes earlier than that, but it just kind of depends on, how severe the injury was to begin with. And like I said, I think they must know something to bring the guy in and sign him to the deal that they did.
Yeah, we'll kind of see. Another guy they brought in here was, and I think, so Noah Brown was there last year, but I think, did they get him like midway through the year or something like that? I think that was kind of what happened, something. But Michael Gallup, who they brought in this year, this is interesting. Last year, he was, after playing 6 or so years with the Cowboys, he was in Raiders camp during training camp, and then he retired and he kind of quit football. Right. And so now he's taking a year off of football. I know he had the ACL tear that he was coming back from and things like that. We've got a pretty staunch opinion, on that. If someone takes a year off football, whether the injury or not, like they're not going to hit the ground running and come back in. And most guys don't return to their level, especially if we're just talking about like taking a year off football, right?
Right.
If we're talking about coming back from an injury and things like that, okay, there's some different factors at play. But how many times do we see guys like retire and then unretire and it actually work?
Right.
Right. So I add Michael Gallup here because I've got low expectations, but what say you? What are you thinking
Yeah.
about Michael Gallup here this season?
Lower expectations for sure. I think part of it will depend on how soon Noah Brown does come back,
Mm-hmm.
because he might be able to squeeze in there with Luke McCaffrey or somebody like that for
Right.
that kind of wide receiver 3 spot. Because as we know, Terry McLaurin is an absolute force. I don't know why he hasn't signed a deal yet. But then you also bring in Deebo Samuel, so wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 are taken.
Right.
That third wide receiver position is kind of up for grabs, and that's where Michael Gallup might be able to get a few snaps in there.
Yeah. All right, let's head on over to the fantasy world here, and we're going to be talking about a guy you just mentioned, Terry McLaurin, Mr. Consistency. 1,000-yard seasons, I think, like every year, but his rookie year he's had. I mean, he's kind of almost similar to a guy we talked about in James Conner, and just some gun that just is going to consistently produce. And Terry McLaurin there. What are your thoughts about McLaurin here? Is this someone you're targeting yet again this season in the fantasy world?
Yeah, for sure. I think he was Jayden Daniels' favorite target by far last year. Finally has a quarterback, so I don't necessarily think that incoming Deebo Samuel will necessarily take too many options away from Terry McLaurin. It
Right.
might just add to his greatness as a deep threat, just because you do have that true wide receiver 2 that has to take some attention away from him.
Yeah. I think if anything, you mentioned Devo, and I'm looking at the stats here. McLaurin with almost 1,100 yards, 500 yards more than any other wide receiver. Second leading receiver on that team was Ertz. I think, Devo may eat more into Ertz's territory and those yards and targets, especially Ertz another year older there. So that'll be interesting to see, and what Devo we're going to get. Because
it'll be interesting to see how Kingsbury fits him into his offense, because he can be kind of an interesting offensive coordinator as well. Kind of like we talk about Sean McVay all the time and how he uses Puka Nacua in all kinds of different situations, similar to Kyle Shanahan, how he used Deebo. And I think Kingsbury will probably do something fairly similar.
Yeah, he's got Samuel, he's got Austin Eckler, so he's got some like little gadget guys he can work with. So that will be interesting. They love their screens there in Washington. All right, and then Jayden Daniels, he's coming in at our QB3 for us here, just under Lamar and Josh Allen. His rushing ability and the offense's ability to go. I think it's really hard to get him lower than that there. We talked about the sophomore slump, but one of the things that he brings is his legs that, someone like CJ Stroud does not. I mean, he rushed for almost 900 yards and 6 touchdowns last year. He just really has been effective in knowing when to run and then knowing when to get out of bounds. I mean, he definitely took a couple shots that they're going to have to talk to him about, and he kind of did that in college. But as little as his frame is, he has been a reliable kind of player, as someone who's been on the field, and availability is a huge piece. So I still think, despite what we may see as effective as this offense being, it's really hard for him to get past QB3 in the fantasy.
For sure. And I think that's where the biggest difference between him and Stroud is, just his ability to run, use his legs, and get out of dodge when he needs to, because he can be a major threat on the ground. And like you said, he can take some shots, but typically he does get himself out of dodge fairly quickly. And I'm sure over the past 3-4 months in the off season, he's probably continued to look into that and work on that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, let's get on over to the betting space here. Again, these Commanders coming off a 12-5 season last year. Win total sitting at 9.5. Fairly even each way. A little bit of difference depending on where you get it at what book. Make the playoffs sitting around minus 150-ish. Missed the playoffs about plus 115 to plus 130. To win the division, anywhere from plus 210 or plus 225. NFC 9-1, plus 850. And then Super Bowl champions, anywhere from 18 to 20-1 here. So a team that is expected to make the playoffs by Vegas. Do you have any plays on futures or win totals for this team?
Win totals, I do not. I really wanted to take the under at 9.5, but at the same time, I can see them winning 10, 11 games again. I think it's one of those things where it's kind of wait and see if opposing defenses catch up to Jayden Daniels and how their defense looks, being another year older.
Yeah. I will take their under 9.5. Surprise, surprise. Plus 105 over on DraftKings there. Look, they got a fairly tough schedule. They draw the NFC North and the AFC West. Obviously, two of the better divisions there in football. I've also got questions on the offensive and defensive line. We talked about replacing Sam Cosmi. Larry Tunsil is a great player when he's on the field. He struggled with injuries. Like, that Houston offensive line was awful. So if we have a situation where Tunsil's struggling to stay on the field, there's no Sam Cosmi, and now you're relying on, some backups to take over there, that's going to be a little dangerous. Like, this is a Washington Commanders offensive line that's not too far away from being pretty bad. And then the defense too. Can the pass rush get home? Dorrance Armstrong came on, had a decent year, but they got rid of Dante Fowler. They got rid of Jonathan Allen. Now you're relying on 40-year-old Von Miller and Javon Kinlaw, who's been unable to stay on the field. So I understand things broke right for them last year. They had a great year, but I have a hard time figuring that everything is going to go so smoothly this year. So I don't think they're going to get to double-digit wins. I don't think they're going to bottom out. I think Jayden Daniels gives them a good floor of about 7-8 wins, maybe 9. But I don't have them getting to 10 wins. And if I'm going to take the under 9.5, then I'm going to take the missed playoffs at plus 130 because, last year, 11-6 Packers were the 7th seed in the NFC. You needed at least, obviously, 11. I would say you need at least 10 wins to get there. So if I'm going to take the under, why not grab the nicer place at the missed playoffs at plus 130? I don't think a 9-win team is getting into the playoff NFC. So that's the two plays I'm going with there. Obviously, they're very similar. You might want to just play the one. I'd probably say the missed playoffs over the 9.5 just because you get a little bit more of plus money there. But I will take both because I think this is,
And who knows? The NFC is a pretty stout conference anyways. Even if they get to 10 wins, just based on tiebreakers, they still might not make it.
Right, last year. Last year, a 10-win team, 10-7 team did not make the playoffs. So, those are my two plays for this team. What do you got over
there? So let's flip over to the player futures side of things, and this is a guy that we haven't talked about at all, but I know that you're a little bit of a fan of him, and that's Brian Robinson.
Oh, hell yeah.
I'm taking his over 775.5 rushing yards at minus 110. He went over this total last year. He went over it in his rookie year as well. 2 years ago, he missed it by like 40 yards, but only played in 15 games. Last year, he only played in 14 games. And like I said, he did make this total. If we look at his 17-game average, if he's able to stay healthy the entire year, this is a guy that averages or would average 965 yards just based on his attempts and yards per carry. So, assuming that offensive line does take a little bit of a step up with Tunsil and the rookie, obviously don't have Cosmi for the majority, if not all the whole season, but he is their, ground and pound back. They have Austin Eckler there, but they use him more as a gadget guy.
Right.
So I do think that B-Rob gets over that 775.
No, yeah, absolutely. Love Brian Robinson. Guy's a stud. The dude got shot and then came back 4 games later. The dude's he's a stud. Again, he's division rival, whatever. I think, I'm not as, you'll see as the episode goes on, but my hatred is not quite there as for the Commandos because they've kind of been dog shit the past couple of years, past 2 decades really, other than the RG3 spike. But, Brian Robinson, love him. I will probably also be on that. I think for him to get to 800 yards, like you said, he did it in 14 games last year. I think they're going to need to have some of that running game. Maybe they're reining in Daniels, telling him to run less. So I like that play. I think there's a lot of ways that he can get over that. I like that there. All right, for these Washington Commandos, first team in the NFC East, I am on the under and them to miss the playoffs. I think, hey, is it going to be a sophomore slump, or are all these old dudes finally going to kind of father time, finally going to play? Derek is riding Brian Robinson over 775 yards. We are both a fan of any man that can get shot in the leg and return to playing football in just 4 games.
100%.
And we're going to move on here to our next team in the division. Before we do that, I got to tell you guys about one of our awesome sponsors here, and that is Bob Lung's Fantasy Football Consistency Guide. Get a leg up on your opponents with Bob's 10th annual edition of the Fantasy Football Consistency Guide for 2025. Purchase yours for a measly $15 on Amazon. Just search 2025 Fantasy Football Consistency Guide. Yes, 10th annual consistency. We are not talking Fast and Furious or Rush Hour or Rocky or any other sequel. I could have just stopped at 2. It's 10th for a reason, because people want it. So make sure you get it so you're not the only one left out in your fantasy league.
Thank you for watching the IDP Plus YouTube network. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Be sure to tap the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content.